Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of the First Nations peoples. So I know here where I am in Vancouver, those peoples are the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. But many of you are on the land of other nations. So please feel free to write those nation names in the chat if you'd like. And let's just remember our connection to our siblings in these nations and pray for the day in which we might be with them in right relationship. So welcome. It's so good to see you all. This is session 4, I believe, of our Afterlife series, and I'm going to turn it over to Harold. So thank you.
Good to be here again. Good to see you. Thank you so much. You know, a nickname for this course could be Family Resemblances regarding ideas of the afterlife. We're going to look at Zoroastrian ideas and Islamic teachings on the afterlife, and you'll see family resemblances between them, as well as some of the other ideas that we've looked at. I sent you another chart, where the 4 realms of existence, and each time I've modified it slightly to emphasize some things we're looking at this week. So let me start from the top, the divine realm, and give you some Zoroastrian terms, and then I'll do the same thing and go down the levels, and we'll look at Islamic terms too. Both Zoroastrians and Muslims talk about the creator. So if we translate their terms, theological terms, into English, it comes up the creator, meaning the one creator of the visible and invisible universe. Another term that Zoroastrians use is Ahura Mazda. It's not a car. It means wise Lord. Wise Lord. What an interesting concept. So God is wise, a source of wisdom. Father of good thought is also on the chart there. Right under Ahura Mazda is father of good thought. That's another very Zoroastrian sounding term. If you think of the Islamic tradition, of course, they have the term Allah, meaning the God or the only God. And there's many names for God in Islamic tradition. Tradition says 99 names of God, including the beneficent, the merciful, the compassionate, the light, the real. Some of these terms I have on this chart. Another one is the unseen or the hidden. What a fascinating name for God that is. The power behind the unseen. If you go down to the next level, the revelatory or transforming realm, and the term Holy Spirit, you know, that has a very simple, familiar ring to it, but it's the first major religious tradition to use that term was the Zoroastrian tradition, which goes back about 3,000 years. It's the religion of the ancient Persian culture, and we'll say more about that later. But Holy Spirit, as opposed to destructive spirit, and they're seen as in opposition. The term, the word, is very important in Islam, just like it is in all the Western religions. The mother of the book is a term in Islam which means the source of all books, capital B, the source of all revelations. And of course, Zoroaster is the prophet that comes from this revelatory realm in the Zoroastrian tradition, and Muhammad, the prophet who comes from the revelatory realm in the Islamic tradition. If you go down to the afterlife realm, there's a term here, order of angelic beings. There's a very sophisticated view of angelic beings in the Zoroastrian tradition, so that would be a very key term. And then in the chart, I put 2 lines here that have purely Zoroastrian terms, although they'll sound familiar. Paradise. That's an ancient Persian word that means walled garden, which is fascinating because if you went into a walled garden, you would be cut off from all the noise and chaos of the village, and you could enjoy, the beauty of the garden, the sounds of the birds, and maybe a little fountain or stream running through the garden. So paradise is an ancient Persian and Zoroastrian term for the heavenly realm. They have other terms too. The best existence. What an amazing word that is. And the worst existence. The house of song is a synonym for heaven or paradise. And the house of lies is a synonym for hell. And then they have Hemistagon, which is the region of the mixed. Does that sound familiar? Other traditions call that purgatory or limbo, perhaps, the region of the mixed. Okay, those are some terms in the Zoroastrian tradition. And the major term in Islam is the hereafter. That term is used literally hundreds of times in the Quran, the sacred scripture of Islam. Then going down to the earthly realm, both Zoroastrians and Muslims talk a lot about the soul, the human soul as created by God. And Zoroastrians emphasize what we would today call virtues like faith, hope, love, peace, wisdom, justice, kindness. Those are attributes of the soul which are to be cultivated, as opposed to their opposites, which are vices. Another important feature, the idea of the creation and its creatures. Both Islam and Zoroastrian faith are very attuned to that. God made creatures, and we are to cultivate those creatures. There's a tremendous ethic of stewardship in Zoroastrian faith, like pay special attention to cows and sheep and camel and dogs. There's an early version of animal rights in the Zoroastrian tradition. And the concept of holy cow, you probably associate that with Hinduism, but Zoroastrianism and Hinduism have family resemblances because they come from an Aryan tradition, heritage. Okay, so creation and creatures, this is important to both Muslims and Zoroastrians. Looking at the human condition, I put that term there, and choice is extremely central to Zoroastrianism. And the same with Islam. We were given choice. So God gave us choice. He gave the soul choice. We can either direct ourselves to benevolent purposes or to destructive purposes, or something in between. We have a whole range of choices. So human life is a bunch of choices, and our afterlife is directly dependent on these choices and actions that we make, in this life. Okay, that's a quick introduction to those levels. And, my purpose in using this chart over and over is the belief that humanity, in its different cultural and religious expressions, is talking about the same reality. That's a belief I have, that we name the levels of reality differently. That doesn't mean that that the religions disagree essentially about the nature of ultimate reality. Okay, let me quickly say something about that. I want to talk at least through the first 2 pages about the Zoroastrian faith, and then open it up for comments and questions and observations. And then we'll look at Islam and do the same thing and go through some quotations and then open it up again. Okay, I want to tell you about my discovery of Zoroastrianism. 25 years ago, I was trying to teach a course in world religion, and I came to the awareness that Zoroastrianism is a major world religion. If we take the Persian Empire seriously, which I do, so for 1,200 years, the Persian Empire was one of the greatest civilizations humanity's ever known. There are kings like Cyrus the Great, who's mentioned in the Bible. He's in Isaiah 45. He's called a Messiah. Would you believe that? In other words, a divinely anointed king. Cyrus the Great. What did Cyrus the Great do? He freed the Jews from Babylon. And not only that, he said, you believe in one God, I believe in one God, it's the same God, so I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you build your temple in Jerusalem. So the Persian Zoroastrians were committed to helping Jews over several hundred years. That's an amazing fact. One of the successors to Cyrus the Great was Darius the Great. Under Darius, the empire got even bigger. It included not only all of the Middle East, and I mean all of it, all the way from, say, Palestine to the edges of Afghanistan and Pakistan, but also including places like what we would call Turkmenistan or Kazakhstan, as well as Turkey and Egypt. Can you imagine, that's a large piece of real estate. The Persian Empire under Darius was the largest empire the world had ever known. And, it was actually a sophisticated empire. And Darius and Cyrus made it what we would today call a multicultural society with religious freedom. As long as you observe a set of laws that they believed were revealed, by Zoroaster, who was teaching Mazda, the wise Lord, everyone would be happy. So very sophisticated ancient culture with Zoroastrian roots. But what we know about it in the West is that the Persians were the bad guys picking on the Greeks. Most of you, that would be what you know about Zoroastrianism and Persians. But there was a guy named Aeschylus who wrote a play called The Persians. And to everyone's shock, that play was sort of treating the Persians as ordinary people, with high ideals and with failures and with challenges. So that was sort of a risk that Aeschylus took. But anyway, so I think you and I we're Eurocentric probably. We have a Western point of view about the mighty evil empire of Persians picking on the Greeks. That is not a correct analysis. It was one of the greatest civilizations ever. It was just as mighty as Rome. And when it followed Zoroastrian teachings, it was a force of justice in the world. And some of these, if we looked at carefully at what culture was like under Darius and Cyrus, we would see that, it had a human rights standard, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The earliest form of that was in the ancient Persian civilization. The theme of Zoroastrianism is good thoughts, good words, good deeds. It sounds so simple, but it's a constant monitoring of ourselves. What are we thinking? What are we saying? And what are we doing? And if you think of that as similar to the Buddhist Eightfold Path, you're quite right. I think of the Buddhist Eightfold Path as a sort of elaboration of good thoughts, good words, good deeds, right? So Zoroastrianism has family resemblances with Buddhism and with Hinduism as well. Okay, so on the first page, I list some of these cultural highlights through the great figure of Cyrus, Darius. There were other, you probably know that Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire. And so the Persian Empire was dominated by Greek influence for 83 years, and then it recovered. And then the Persian Empire continued. So if you look at the whole the expanse of Persian, civilization, it's 1,200 years long. If you count Persian influence from the birth of Zoroaster, it's longer than that. Maybe 1,600 years of enduring with strength. Okay, the date of Zoroaster, no one knows for sure, but most scholars are saying about 1000 BCE, before the Common Era, because that's consistent with the language of the Gathas, which are the sayings of Zoroaster, the song or poem-like utterances of Zoroaster, which, if you follow languages, they change over the years. And it looks like Zoroaster must have been teaching about 1000 years BCE. That's the best scholarly guess. Okay. Here's the big surprises for me. When I first discovered Zoroastrianism, as I was learning it, I felt like I was discovering secrets up in the attic of the attic of Western culture. I was learning secrets because I was seeing that certain ideas, like the Holy Spirit, for example, or the idea of a prophet who is sent by a wise Lord to bestow an ethical and spiritual message to humanity, which will uplift culture. They even use have you heard the term, the kingdom of heaven on earth? That's another one. That's a Zoroastrian term. That's the goal of history, to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth. Another theme of Zoroastrianism is the triumph of good over evil, the ultimate triumph of good over evil. Another teaching of Zoroastrianism is that God is so good that eventually everyone will be saved. Everyone will be brought into the family of creation as a whole. My goodness, that's called universal salvation, that doctrine. And yet there's an acute awareness of evil and destruction and mistakes that it's possible to make. Here's another thing about Zoroastrianism, that Zoroastrian parents taught their children that they have an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder, and that both of them are whispering to them all the time and making suggestions. And you have to learn to systematically tune out the whisperings of the devil on your shoulder and listen to the angel. So you have to systematically replace all your bad thoughts with good thoughts, your bad words with good words, and your bad deeds with good deeds, and that's a lifelong process. If you can imagine a culture that would be built on a foundation of that teaching, you'd be impressed. If a certain number of citizens in such a culture followed that, they would create a mighty civilization, a very thoughtful civilization. Okay. The struggle of good versus evil. I'm down 2/3 of the way on the first page, and there's this figure called Angra Mainyu. Forget that name. Call him the evil spirit. And the evil spirit has 6 demons working for him, and they're opposing the creative or Holy Spirit, who has 6 archangels working for that team. In other words, the good team opposes the bad team. So what we call human life and society is a struggle between good and evil. So we're supposed to get on the good team. That summarizes the Zoroastrian point of view. Be able to discern good and evil and get on the good team. Okay. And then there's a concept that I love called the final restoration in Zoroastrianism, and that's almost at the bottom of the first page here. So Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, is benevolent and will therefore redeem all souls. And this belief says 3,000 years or so after Zoroaster, a king of kings will usher in the final restoration. Wow. 3,000 years after Zoroaster is right now. So, the Baha'i faith says, well, this new era is the Baha'i faith. I think a Christian might say, well, that new era is pointing to the return of Christ. A Muslim might say that prophecy is pointing to the Mahdi, who is soon to come, something like that. Anyway, that's another one of my interests, is comparative prophecy. So Zoroastrianism is loaded with prophecies that are very interesting. One of them points right to Jesus. And the story of the Magi in Matthew is a direct link with the Zoroastrian priest astrologers. Okay, now I want to get to the things we're looking at, teachings about the idea of the spirit. Look at the bottom of page 1. This is another thing that totally amazes me. There's a lot of detail about what's going on inside a human being. Human nature consists of parts or agencies. Some of these will sound very familiar. We have a vital spirit. We have a personality. We have reason. We have conscience. We have a soul. We have destiny. as well as the eternal soul, which pre-existed our birth and consented to joining creation. I find this a fascinating teaching that there's echoes of it in Judaism and Christianity and in the Latter-day Saints too, the pre-existence. The idea that part of us knows and agreed to coming into existence. We agreed. And it's like a covenant. So we agreed to come into existence, and what we're willing to do is follow divine guidance or ultimate truth. That's the price for coming into existence, to be held to that standard. There's a very strong version of this teaching in the Zoroastrian faith. Tremendous emphasis on choice. Oh my goodness, we got to make good choices and get on the good team. On page 2, I talk about the basic teaching on the afterlife is that when you die, you come to something called the bridge of the separator. What a powerful image that is. So Zoroaster will meet you on the bridge after you die, and the bridge will get broader and broader and broader if you've had more good deeds than bad deeds, more good thoughts than bad thoughts, more good words than bad words. You see the implication here? That, in other words, the afterlife is the yield of this life. They even use that term, the yield, or the results of what you did in the physical world. Okay, and so if that bridge got narrower and narrower and narrower, you would fall into something, wouldn't you? Like a pit of some kind. And they have elaborate descriptions of what hell is like, and elaborate descriptions of aspects of heaven too. When later on we're going to talk about Islam, and we'll see that there are 7 heavens, and there seem to be levels of hell as well in Islam. Please, Sherry. Yeah.
Just a quick question about these, the division between good and bad deeds. Who do the Zoroastrians, who do they believe will judge that?
Yeah, so they think that the Zoroaster is a prophet from God. Ahura Mazda sent Zoroaster to the world, and their teachings about Zoroastrian teachings emphasize the role of Zoroaster. He knows through divine knowledge what happened in each person's life. So you could say God is judging, or you could say Zoroaster is judging, but Zoroaster is only doing what he was made to do by God. So I think I'm answering your question. That the prophet, who in his celestial station, so he's up there in heaven waiting for you at the gate, and the bridge gets wider or it gets narrower. So if you are taught this over and over as you're in this life, you systematically monitor yourself to make sure that the bridge gets wider when you get there. I don't know. When I first heard this, I thought, so why do I think I've heard this before? So in other words, Christian teachings about the afterlife and Islamic teachings and little bits of the Tibetan Book of the Dead sound a lot like this, that we end up facing what we've done and the consequences for good and for evil, and for in the middle too. Hamistagon is this area in the middle where you go, and guess what happens there? You get more lessons so you can make progress in the other world. That would, yeah, please. Yeah, Kathy.
I'm wondering, just with the bridge metaphor, what puts you there? So like your bridge is kind of middling? Like if it's
a bridge over troubled water, so to speak, like a bridge over a cavern of some kind with bad smells down there, and things to worry about that could happen to you, evil creatures. So it's really amplified. Here's another funny thing. This religion has earthy images as well as profound abstractions. And literally, Zoroaster, I read the Gathas, he was saying to people, I know some of you are rational, and so I'm going to give you some abstract concepts to follow, like goodness and righteousness. Some of you need imagery, so I'm going to give you some imagery too. right? So there's a little of both. So the bridge of the separator is full of images. You want that bridge to be wide. You don't want to fall into the pit because your bridge is too narrow, and it narrows when you get there because of what you've done. You face your music, so to speak. And the images of heaven are incredible. Like you get music there, songs, angelic beings. They get better and better music as you go higher in the heavens. Okay, I want to quickly say something about this towers of silence. Zoroastrians have an incredible system of burial, but the basic idea was they believed that decay is bad. And I think this is a late Zoroastrian development. I don't think Zoroaster himself taught this. It was something that evolved later, I believe. So the belief that the body should not touch the earth, a decaying body should not touch the earth. So they put it up on a tower of silence, and vultures would pick the bones clean. And then you could be buried in a tomb that separated you from the earth. I think Zoroastrians still do this now. There's about 300,000 Zoroastrians still in the world today. And there's about 100,000 in India, and 100,000 in Iran, and 100,000 elsewhere, mostly in England and Canada and the United States and Australia. They went to the Commonwealth nations when, you remember when India split from Pakistan? That's about the same time some of the Zoroastrians in India left to other countries. There aren't many, in other words, but once they were a mighty civilization and they've had impact. Okay. All right, can we look at some of these quotes real quick, and then open it up for a wider discussion, and then do the same thing with Islam, emphasizing afterlife teachings on Islam. All right. Can I call on some people? Okay, Kathy, I'll start with you. Number 2, can you read that? Number 2 is on page 2. It's from the Zoroastrian scriptures.
Yes. When a man sets out on a journey, he takes provisions with him. He takes provisions for as many days as he plans to be away. How then is it that men take no provisions for the unavoidable journey on which one must go once and for all unto eternity?
That's a rather powerful question, isn't it? So the idea is we're going to take an eternal journey. We have a temporary journey going on right now. We should pack our lunch for the eternal journey. And the way we do that is build up good thoughts, good words, good deeds, and build the kingdom of heaven on earth. Wow, that's the idea. Okay. Some of the stuff is hard to read. When you translate ancient Persian, it comes out kind of clunky English. All right, but let me see. Sherry, would you be willing to read number 3?
Sure. When one of the faithful departs this life, it seems to the soul of the faithful one as if it were inhaling a sweet-scented wind, and it seems to him as if his own conscience were advancing to him in the shape of a fair maiden. And she says, "Everybody did love thee for thy greatness, goodness, fairness, and freedom from sorrow. I was lovely, and thou madest me still lovelier." This faithful one goes from the material world to the world of spirit. He steps into the good thought paradise, then into the good word paradise, and then into the good deed paradise.
You see how they're defining paradise. So there's a good word paradise, a good thought paradise, and a good deed paradise. In other words, those are the 3 things you should be monitoring. And so you carry forward with that spiritual project in the other world. Okay, can you read number 5 also, Sherry, if you're willing? Zoroaster said.
Sure. Zoroaster said, "Whichever man or woman, O wise Lord, who gave to me the life of the spirit, will receive the blessing of the divine law and thy might and majesty. I will draw them towards thy adoration. Forth with them all I will cross the bridge of the separator. They will reach paradise, the best existence, the abode of the best thought, where the sun never ceases to shine. The righteous experience eternal life, happiness, and the blessings of the wise Lord.
So, this kind of language shouldn't sound too foreign to, say, a Christian or even a Jew or a Muslim or a Baha'i. This is sort of Western language for some of the things you might experience. I find it fascinating here that it mentions, the bridge of the separator is specifically here. And
So Harold,
yeah,
based on this, it sounds like they believe that the existence in the hereafter is purely spirit. Like, unlike Christians who believe in the resurrection where your body and your spirit are reunited, they believe the existence is purely spirit.
The reason I don't want to say yes right away to that is because there's all these earthly-like descriptions, right? So it looks like there's bodies up there of some kind that are having some kind of mentions the fair maiden. Mm-hmm. And then it also talks about archangels and beings of light that you will see. And then it also uses abstract language. It says, was there some line here about the sun never ceases to shine? For example, Zoroaster, before, when he was called by Ahura Mazda, he said he was taken up into heaven, and where he was, there were no shadows. So light was coming from everywhere so that there were no shadows. That's a very interesting detail. Anyway, so it's a light world of some kind, but yet it has bodies of some kind up there. Anyway, so I don't make too much of this. I think that we can't know for sure exactly, what that teaching is saying, because it's beyond our ordinary experience. But so we exist in some way up there. We can hear songs, we can see angels, we can see, beauty that you would find, say, in a garden. So those are things of some kind, but it's a totally different experience than we're used to down here. Anyway, I think this issue comes up. Is it a spiritual resurrection? Is it a physical resurrection? I think most of the religions are saying it's a spiritual experience up there, but it has physical aspects, or it reminds us of our experience here. Okay.
So quick question then, just on the last phrase there, the righteous experience eternal life. What do they define as eternal life?
I think that means that you keep on growing toward God forever. And you're part of this final restoration plan to save all beings, right? The triumph of good over evil, right? So it's a very long process. They're saying, through different prophets coming into the future, we'll make progress toward that goal. There will come a point where the world will be very different. Okay, speaking of that, there's one more, the last one. Who else can I pick on to read? Anyone else willing to read? Bev, please. Can you read number 8, which is at the top of page 3?
In the final restoration, the whole of mankind will be firmly and enduringly linked in mutual love. Dark spirits will utterly despair of ever being able to harm the world again. Weapons will all be made powerless. Fear will be no more. All peoples will become one voice and will praise the one God. There will be universal joy for the whole of creation.
Okay, I think that starts to answer what Sherry was getting at. That's some of the Zoroastrian concept of the final restoration. What the world will be like, both the spiritual part of the world and the physical part of the world. Quite an amazing image.
I have a question about that. I'm
Please.
just wondering, in the final restoration, so previously some people were going to hell, the worst existence, but it sounds like in the final restoration, hell gets emptied. And
That's
so we
right.
is that
There's
true?
some sort of restoration program for them too. That's how I understand it. Universal salvation. But I think that this teaching is pretty much in all the faiths. There's versions of it, but yet it's become a sectarian issue. Like people fight about that. Universalism, for example, was a strain of Protestant Christianity. I find universalistic teachings in pretty much all faiths. You find little echo. So to me, it's logical. If God is good and God is powerful, then God is not going to allow anyone to eternally suffer. Like the suffering has to be redemptive. So it has to be for some good purpose, ultimately good purpose. So, but I'm biased. See, I think the logic of a good and powerful creator leads to the doctrine of universal salvation. It's just, how long does that take? That's where some of the discussion, might come in. Okay. So, so a Buddhist version of this might be, well, okay, you're a hungry ghost for a little while. Then you learn a few things. Then you become like an angel of some kind. Then you become like a bodhisattva in the higher realms. And then you come back to this earth and do some more good and rise even higher the next time, right? So that would be like a final restoration in phases.
Well, yeah, in Buddhism, we have a belief that the Bodhisattva Jizo has his staff, and it's the one thing that can open hell. So in the end, he can go into hell and rescue all the people there. So I think that's so awesome that, just like you said, that there are these kind of teachings everywhere. So
you do have terms like eternal damnation. I mean, that you can find that. But you also find this idea of God, having compassion, even for sinners. So I don't know what to make of that. I believe, that it's consistent logically. A positive, benevolent, ultimate reality would want all beings to make progress and would provide the means for such. Okay. All right. Anything else about all this? That's a crash course in Zoroastrianism. And I'm curious, if you've never heard any of that, does it sound familiar anyway? I had the most uncanny experience with it. I thought, wait a second, this is amazing. I was especially thrilled because I saw that Zoroastrianism is like a missing link between Western religions and Eastern religions. It obviously sounds like Abrahamic religions, if you mean by that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and throw in the Baha'i faith, but it has things that remind me of India's religions too, Buddhism and Hinduism. There's even a mini sort of a caste teaching in Zoroastrianism that sounds a little bit like early Hinduism. But again, it sort of implies you can work your way up the caste system through good deeds. You elevate yourself. And I'm imagining Cyrus and Darius are kings that know about this faith, right? So that would make them sort of incredibly benevolent if they took these teachings seriously. So a lot different cultures have been taught things by that same one God. They might call it by some other name, right? Anyway, that especially Cyrus, I read about. He liked to do things like disguise himself as an ordinary human being and go to a city and then talk to ordinary people and to priests to find out what that culture is thinking. And he would do that to see what would be a good strategy for incorporating this people into this growing empire without any violence. How can we find common ground with other people? The Magi, which are the followers of Zoroaster, and the rabbis, the early rabbis, met each other in Babylon, right? Because there was a Babylonian captivity. Cyrus comes in and frees them. Some of those rabbis loved the Magi so much they didn't want to leave. Okay, I see a hand up here. Belinda, please. You got to.
Well, I just wanted to add, going back to Cyrus and the Persians and the Greeks,
Yeah.
much of what we know comes from the Greeks, okay? So it's more than a little biased. That war was both sides made mistakes. Let's face it. When there's
Yes.
conflict like that, both sides are wrong. But the Greeks were breaking their treaties and in their trade treaties and making trouble in areas where they had agreed not to. So that was one of the things that launched that war. But anyway, going back to it, one of the things that the Greeks criticized the Persians about was for being effeminate. Why? Because when they had a banquet, the Persians brought their wives to the banquet.
That's effeminate. Oh.
And women had rolled, the wives got up and said things. Imagine that, a woman saying something at a banquet. Well, the Greeks were scandalized by that because the only women that were allowed at their banquets were prostitutes. So they really deeply misunderstood this.
Belinda, you've dug into some interesting things. I'm gonna Google gender rights in ancient Persia. That's fascinating to me because they obviously had a multicultural policy. They had religious freedom policy, right? So cultural diversity policy. Their art reflected all these different peoples that were in the growing empire. Now you're telling me they had some liberation insight about gender equality. That's incredible. Yeah, please.
Well, there were even some women that had important jobs of managing things as well. Anyhow, yeah, that's a worthy one.
See, I was told that Zoroastrian teaching emphasizes education to a high degree. That's another reason the Jews liked them. Oh, you guys are into educating children too. Wow, that's interesting. And so girls got educated. And once you're educated, you take on roles. Okay, was there another hand up? Maybe.
Yeah,
Kathy?
me again.
Okay.
There's another thing about the Zoroastrians. When the Zoroastrians left Persia en masse about 500 or 600 years ago and migrated to India because they were being persecuted by the Muslims, they settled in a certain area and they made an agreement with their Indian hosts that they would not intermarry with any of the castes in India. So they became like a caste. And this has had a negative effect because eventually they sort of took this on themselves and decided that you couldn't marry out. And they're having a problem today because the priesthood is a lineage. And they're having a real problem with that today because a lot of Zoroastrians marry out. They have no choice.
The same thing happened in Judaism. Yeah. When your numbers get smaller, you start to say, we don't want you to marry outside. We're too small, right? But that has nothing to do with what Zoroaster taught.
No. But the Jews were really smart. They decided somewhere along the line that to be a Jew, you have to have a Jewish mother. You pretty well always know who the mother is. You don't always know who the father is.
Yeah.
And there were, I'm sure, many instances where the father of any given child may not have been the choice of the mother. So
thank you.
That was a wise piece and a compassionate piece. And it's too bad our native people weren't allowed to do that too.
Friends, any other points about Zoroastrianism? Anyone else who hasn't spoken? Okay. So let's go on to Islam. Is that okay? On page 3, I introduce Islam very briefly. And what people don't know about Islam in the West, again, because of our Eurocentrism, is how great Islamic civilization was. I just want to quickly give you a glimpse. Islam spread very quickly in both Eastern and Western directions. So the Islamic world, inside of about 150 years from its inception, right, which was early 600s, it spread all the way from Spain through the whole Middle East into Southeast Asia, right? So there are still Muslims in Southeast Asia today. This is very unusual. Most religions take about 300 or 400 years to spread. For example, Zoroastrianism took about 500 years from the time of Zoroaster to the time of an obvious Persian Zoroastrian civilization. From Moses to an obvious Jewish civilization took 300 to 500 years, depending on what date you give for Moses. Christian civilization to emerge on the stage of world history took about 300 years. Islam was about twice as fast in terms, it was unknown that the Arabs, in Arabia, no one knew them. They were not a part of history. And then suddenly they get a revelation from Muhammad, and they're building big cities and universities and banking systems and changing the world. Collecting knowledge of the world, going all the way to China, making libraries, incredible mosques. So we tend to hear only the bad news of Islamist terrorism, but that's a very warped view of what actually happened, I think. So to me, it looks like Islam has all the markings of a great world religion. You have a prophet who says, I'm not teaching you my own ideas. I'm conveying to you things that come from a higher reality, which if we follow them, we will change the world for the better. We will fulfill ourselves individually and socially, but also make a tremendous contribution to the world. That's exactly what happened in Islam, even though they had a lot of internal battles. They had several civil wars, in their first 50 years. In spite of that, because of their emphasis on education and collecting knowledge and spreading the faith, they grew and had a lot of impact. There really would not have been a Renaissance in Europe or a scientific revolution in the 1500s without Islamic learning. I've made a real careful study of that. Anyway, that's my opinion. It's my opinion. And it's not a Eurocentric view I'm offering. Okay. If you look at the theme of Islam, it seems to be something like submission to God and building a spiritual nation. Maybe some of this is familiar to you. Let's jump down to what I put under the afterlife, 2/3 of the way down on page 3. Rewards and punishments in the hereafter reflect God's mercy and justice. Mercy and justice. If you look at all those names of God in Islam, most of them are very positive, like the beneficent, the kindly. But some are a little bit scary, like the avenger, the judge, right? So again, this reminds me of Zoroastrianism in the sense that you're getting messages about good and evil. And the more you follow the messages encouraging the good, the more likely that your hereafter, will be positive. Okay. Look under heaven near the bottom of page 3. Heaven, paradise, reward, the gardens, and Firdaus. Those are 5 words that mean something like the same thing, including an Arabic transliteration here. A lovely gated realm, gardens beneath which rivers flow, provides rewards that no eyes have seen nor ears heard. Such rewards are at distinct levels of the gardens. Youthful servants called Huris have large, brilliant eyes and beautiful forms. Special drinks bring no head throbbing or loss of reason. See, they're commenting on alcohol. They're saying, in heaven, you get a drink that doesn't give you a headache and make you wake up with a hangover. Now, so a lot of this is the image of remember where this religion was born, in a desert where there are oases. Oases are places where rivers run under them, enough to nourish the plant life, enough for people to start to live there in larger numbers and not just be nomads. Okay. Here it is possible, I'm reading still under heaven, here it is possible to see the Lord from time to time without asking how you can do this. You see, in other words, they have a teaching that says Allah is too magnificent. God is too magnificent to actually see. That would be, but then they say, but in a way you do see God when you go to heaven. And they said, but don't think about that too much. That's actually one of their theologians put it that way. Don't ask how. It's a different kind of seeing. Okay. There's a river in paradise, Kothar. Look at hell, 7 levels. I'm on page 4, 7 levels of divine response to misdeeds and faithlessness. Wretched ones who violated God's covenant are driven there like animals. Skins are burned, beatings suffered, tasting of festering blood. Some details that are so parallel to some of the bad details of hell in Zoroastrianism. You might find similar things in the book of Revelation, in the New Testament. I have a theory. You don't have to buy this theory, but if one God is behind all the different religions, then it's okay for Christians and Jews and Muslims to have borrowed previous teachings of God, let's say from Zoroaster. That's okay. And it looks to me like that actually is what happened. If you look at, Buddhist images and Buddhist teachings, they flow from some Hindu teachings that came earlier. So it's part of a river of revelation or guidance or teaching or dharma, right? So it's okay if it's not like one group stole it from another. If it belongs to, Ahura Mazda or the wise Lord of all people, it's not like it's stolen. Okay, the reason I'm mentioning this is, a lot of people in the West, they know about Dantes Inferno, Dante's Paradiso, and the Purgatorio. So that's about heaven, hell, and purgatory. And all of that came 500 years after this very well-developed Islamic tradition called the night journey of Muhammad. So in the middle of page 4, I have a summary of a very large, complex system, a tradition called the night journey of Muhammad. There's a line in the Quran that says, and I'm reading it here, "Glory be to him who carried his servant by night from the sacred mosque at Mecca to the remote temple in Jerusalem, that we here is Allah, the royal we, that God might show him some of our signs." So there's one little line or only a few lines about this in the Quran, but then a whole bunch of questions were asked of Muhammad about that. So he said a whole bunch of other things, what happened on that journey. So that became this tradition of the night journey of Muhammad, the heavenly ascent of the prophet. And I've given you a summary here. He ends up going up to the 7 levels of heaven and sees, levels of hell as well. And he sees important figures up there: Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Adam, Zacharias, John, Jacob, Joseph, Ishmael, Isaac, Aaron, Lot, Noah, Enoch. Do those sound familiar to you? So they're biblical figures. So the Quran sees itself as another revelation from the same God that revealed the New Testament and the Hebrew scriptures. So here is Muhammad going up to the 7 levels of heaven and learning things and describing them, and also he goes down to hell too. Malik, who's the Arabic Prince of Shadows, shows him some things there. If this story sounds familiar to you, it's because of Dante's Inferno. That's my theory. If you don't know about this tradition in Islam, it still sounds like you've heard it somewhere before. So remember, Islamic learning really lifted up Europe. There were Islamic universities in Spain and in Sicily and the knowledge that the Muslims had collected and codified and translated into different languages, that got into Europe. Anyway, that's my theory. What we have in Dantes Inferno and Paradiso is a Christian version of Muhammad's night journey. Most people who study these documents look at them and go, that's amazing. So anyway, in many ways, the development of Christian civilization is dependent on Islamic civilization. It got some gifts from a slightly later revelation. Okay.
Harold?
Yeah,
Harold,
please. Yeah.
I'm just looking at some of your notes here, and I find this interesting. Under personal resurrection, it says the individual reuniting of soul with body for the deserving and faithful.
Where are you reading? Where are you reading?
On page 4,
Yeah.
below, under personal resurrection.
Oh, gotcha.
Below.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like, have I got this understanding correctly, that they believe that for the deserving and faithful, they will have the reuniting of soul with body? That's specific to the faithful? Is that their belief?
I put here doctrinal dispute. Is that body physical or spiritual? I found, Muslim theologians saying slightly different things, just like I've seen Christian theologians saying different things. But yeah, it looks to me like they're saying that's a good thing. You'll be reunited with your body in a purer form, like the best
Okay.
it ever looked, which
Okay,
I think
so-
is close to Latter-day Saint teaching as well. Right?
So I guess what I'm trying to discern here, what they're saying is that for the faithful and deserving, they get the opportunity to have the body and soul reunited, as opposed to gifting it to everybody. It's for the deserving and
again,
faithful.
yes, gifting it to everybody. However, some theologians in the Islamic tradition say eventually everyone is saved. You see, so you could say most people might say, no, there's eternal damnation and eternal salvation. And then there's some people stuck in the middle, which I forgot to talk about, Barzakh, stuck in the middle.
Okay.
But
so anyway, the reason I'm just touching on this is because going back to hell and punishment,
right.
everything that it's described in there sounds like a physical punishment. And so if only the faithful get bodies, how can it be a physical punishment? I'm trying to figure out how this works.
See, I think that's the same problem in studying religion, period. We have to use language that describes the physical world to talk about the non-physical world. So I take that language to be symbolic. It's pointing to spiritual realities. So that's my interpretation. So if Paul talks about the resurrection of the body, there are people who are going to think of that as physical, and others are going to say spiritual. And then of those who say spiritual, they may say, well, that means completely non-visible. And others will say, no, you can visualize it. It's just a different kind of spiritual body that's beyond our experience in this life. So that argument goes on. I try to avoid it and say, there's more family resemblances here than there are differences. At least that's the way it looks to me. I got to go back to something else. Sorry.
Just one more question.
Yeah.
Under the night journey section,
Yeah.
there's a phrase in there, the saved and the damned. What is their definition of damned?
Okay, I skipped over hell. Look at the top of page 4. Hell, punishment, Jahannam. 7 levels of divine response to misdeeds and faithlessness. Just like there were 7 levels of heaven, there's now 7 levels of hell. Wretched ones who violated God's covenant are driven there like animals, skins are... Oh, I did read some of this. Okay. God's mercy and compassion are greater than his wrath. That statement is said so many times in the Quran, it's ridiculous. Yet, many Muslims say, either there's eternal punishment, but if God's mercy is greater than his wrath, hell will not last forever. You see my reasoning?
Mhm.
And I think in some other Muslim theologians have said the same thing. So you can make a universal salvation interpretation or an eternal damnation interpretation. Please, Kathy.
I'll say something and then I know Richard has a question.
Okay.
This is my very favorite thing to share from Islam is my favorite hadith, which basically says it's really hard to go to hell in Islam because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says that if you want to do a good deed and you don't do the good deed, it counts as one good deed. If you want to do a bad deed and you don't do the bad deed, that also counts as one good deed. If you want to do a bad deed and you do a bad deed, that counts as one bad deed. But if you want to do a good deed and you do the good deed, it counts as 1,000 good deeds.
Oh, hallelujah. That's
So you
that a
have to
hadith?
try
Yeah.
really hard to go to hell in Islam.
Yeah.
So that's my
that-
favorite. It's one of the hadiths.
Yeah, that dramatically illustrates this. God is more merciful and compassionate than judging, right? God does judge, but God, there's more compassion and mercy. Excellent illustration. Okay, Richard, please, Richard.
Just carrying on from a comment I heard from Bill Lemon, who mentioned that during the Middle Ages, the princes and the various crowned families were being shipped off to Spain to study in the Islamic universities so that they could, get the highest education that they could find. So that was a source of enlightenment for the whole Europe as well as the Middle East.
It's also a well-kept secret in Western history. They don't want to admit that they learned so much from Muslims. They want to say, we built our universities too, but they couldn't have done it if they hadn't seen what a university in Toledo or Cordoba looked like. Then suddenly they popped up in France and Germany and England too. Okay, Belinda, be brief. We got a lot of reading to do from the Quran.
Okay, very brief. What you just said is very true. And I wanted to add that during the Islamic Golden Age from, what was it, about 750, 800 to 1250 or something like that, many, many, many of the outstanding scholars and scientists of that time were Iranian, Persian.
Absolutely.
Very, very interesting that. And their science was miles and miles and miles ahead.
That's
of the
because they
Western
had
science.
caliphs, or they had imams over there and caliphs who were learning oriented, right? We don't know everything. There's other cultures that have found things. Let's find them, translate them into Arabic, study them more, cultivate. Anyway,
If you want
okay.
to laugh, just look at the interview shows now and see how many of them are Persians in the States, running all kinds of institutions and hospitals and all kinds of stuff. It's what goes around comes around.
Yeah. So many, the people that wanted freedom, from oppression in Iran moved elsewhere, enriching the rest of the earth. Okay, quickly, friends, at the bottom of page 4, there's the most quoted. This is the most quoted passage in the Quran about the afterlife, but it's about more than the afterlife. I think it's about not only the afterlife, but the future of humanity too, almost like the final triumph of good over evil or something like that. Okay, please, Kathy, can you read that? When the sun is folded up.
Yes.
It's at the bottom, page 4. Yeah.
When the sun is folded up, when the stars fall, losing their luster, when the souls are sorted out, when the scrolls are laid open, when the world on high is unveiled, when the garden is brought near, then each soul shall know what it has put forward.
Okay, that's one quote from the Quran. Yeah. Then I put another one that's also very, very, very well known. Can you read that one too? The trumpet.
Yes. The trumpet will just be sounded when all that are in the heavens and on the earth will swoon. Then will a second trumpet be sounded, when behold, they will be standing and looking on, and the earth will shine with the glory of its Lord.
One more quote. Yeah.
One day the earth shall be changed to a new earth, and so shall be the heavens, and humankind will be marshaled forth before God.
So this is an intellectual challenge that I find in all religions. The language about the afterlife could be thought of as applying to individuals, but some of the language is also talking about collective humanity in the future. I believe it's talking about collective humanity on earth as well as in heaven. So that's the problem of this field called eschatology, the study of the doctrine of endings and new beginnings.
Mhm.
How much of that applies to the individual, how much it applies to society as a whole? The answer is it applies to both. It's as if God is trying to use economy of language and talk about, higher reality vertically or longitudinally in history. Okay, let's go on here. On page 5 and going on to page 6 are some one-liners, short passages about the afterlife. We won't read all of them. Sherry, would you mind reading 2, 3, and 4?
Or you're muted, Sherry.
Sorry, under Islamic scriptural guidance?
Yes, page 5, Islamic scriptural guidance, 2, 3, and 4. Yeah.
2, 3, and 4, got it. You prefer this life, although the life to come is better and more enduring. It is we who give life, and it is we who make to die, and to us is the homecoming. You must remember to gather from this life such harvest as will be of use to you hereafter.
Okay, I want to comment on this number 4 here. You must remember to gather from this life such harvest as will be of use to you hereafter. Do you remember Zoroaster talking about if you're going on an eternal journey, you better prepare. So here is, I think it's the same idea. Gather from this life such harvest as will be of use to you hereafter. What is that harvest? If not good deeds, if not kindness, if not, being of benefit to others, if not following divine law, right? If not being an example of obedience and service, right? So all of those things are good deeds, good thoughts, good words, so to speak, but they will give you a harvest. Baha'is would put this in the language of virtues. So you need to develop virtue-like qualities in this life. That's what will carry you. That's the currency of the next world. I think a similar thing is being said here. Okay, Kathy, can you read 5, 6, and 7?
Yes. No one in heaven or on earth knows the unseen save God, and they do not know when they will be raised. Does human knowledge extend to the hereafter? No, for they are in doubt about it. No, for they cannot see it. God created the 7 heavens in harmony, one above the other. Those who wish for the things of the hereafter and strive for them with all due striving and have faith, they are the ones whose striving is acceptable to God.
Okay, and one more. Number 8. This is repeated. Same idea several times in the Quran. Yeah. Okay.
Wealth and sons are the adornment of the present world, but the abiding things, the deeds of righteousness, are better with God in reward and better in hope.
So in other words, people think they're being great when they have a lot of children and a lot of wealth and a lot of things they can show to others. And Allah is saying, guess what? What matters in the other world is righteousness. I mean, this is identical with Zoroastrian teachings and teachings in other traditions as well. That's what matters up there. I don't know if you remember the very first session, we talked about near-death experience and people who had something like a mini afterlife experience. They came back and said, you know what I saw up there? All the things that we think are important are not so important up there. And the things we ignore down here, like good deeds and kindnesses and gentle behavior with others, that's what matters up there. Oh my goodness, it's a whole new world. Anyway, I remember that was part of the near-death experience research. And I think, again, that fits perfectly with some of the things we're hearing here. Okay, on the last page, Anyone else willing to read? Bev, can you read 10, 11, and 12?
Sure. We shall bring forth for every man on the day of resurrection a book which he will find wide open. Read your book. Your soul suffices as a reckoner against you this day.
Oh, let's please talk about this. A book. This comes up in Jewish teaching as well, and Christian teaching. There's a book of life, a book of your life. And now here is Allah saying, read your book.
Yeah.
This is the book of all the things you thought, said, and did, for better and for worse. That is your book. In other words, this is Allah saying, nothing escapes me. You might have thought you were invisible, but you were not. Read your book. Okay, I'm paraphrasing. Okay, Bev, keep going. Sorry.
Behold, two guardian angels appointed to learn man's doings, one sitting on the right and one on the left. And the stupor of death will bring truth before their eyes. This is the thing which you were trying to escape.
One on the right and one on the left. So it reminds me of what Zoroastrian parents tell their kids. One more.
The ones who have heeded their Lord will be driven along to the garden. Its gates will swing open, and its keepers will say, Peace be unto you, praise be to God, who has held true to his promise for us, and let us inherit the earth. You will see angels clustering around the throne.
Okay, some of the imagery. And part of the reason I wanted to put Zoroastrianism and Islam together is, well, they both come from the Middle East, but there's all kinds of other family resemblances in how they understand heaven and hell. The imagery they use, right? Okay, who else is willing to read? Anyone else willing to read? Dorothy? No, you don't like to read.
I got volunteered.
Oh, Richard is going to read.
Which one are we doing now?
I'll read another time. I like to read.
Okay, another time though. Okay, Richard, number 14.
Okay. Know that the present life is but a sport and a diversion, an adornment and a cause of boasting among you, and a rivalry in wealth and children. It is as a rain whose vegetation pleases the unbelievers, then it withers, and you see it turning yellow, then it comes to straw. And in the hereafter, there is grievous punishment and forgiveness from God and good pleasure, whereas the present life is but the joy of delusion.
So in other words, our enjoyments in this realm are rather transient, and they're going to be a lot more enduring in the other world, which is eternal. My goodness. Oh,
Make a comment on number one.
Please.
What struck me there was it's almost I've heard people currently thinking about this. It almost seems like throughout your life, you are in your own mind storing up everything you did. And apparently you're judged not on so much what you did as what you intended to do, what you wanted, the why of your life instead of the what.
Absolutely.
How can you hide all the different aspects of your mind? Like people are pretending God isn't going to know, or I'll hide this away from other people. You can't hide your own mind away. You're just basically running through the history of your mind.
So purity of motive, this is sometimes called. I think even human legal systems take this into account. What was your actual motive? You might have done some damage, but you might have been trying to do a lot of good. So you're sort of emphasizing.
It's like Nixon's log tapes, You don't know that they're being stored away. They come out in the end and oops.
Like Allah saying, read your book. It's recorded. Okay, Richard, one more. 16.
15 or 16?
16. Oh, 15, I mean. 15.
Okay. And those foremost in faith will be foremost in the hereafter. These will be those nearest to God in gardens of bliss. Round about them, they will be served by youths of perpetual freshness, enjoying cups filled out of clear flowing fountains, and with fruit, any that they may select. And there will be companions with big and lustrous eyes, a reward for their past life. No frivolity will they hear therein, nor any taint of ill, only the saying, peace, peace.
You know, I saw a commentary on this passage, and they were reminding that this religion grew up in a desert where, you know, travel is quite dangerous. You know, if you don't die of thirst, you might get raided by, some savage tribes or something. So out of that context, the idea of sitting in a oasis, you know, with that's nice and cool because there are trees and you're getting drinks and you're being served by beautiful youth, and you're not, it's non-alcoholic. This is not going to cause a headache, and you hear nothing but peace, peace. So that's like an image that's, you know, so everyone has had a little bit of that experience, you know, in Arabia, and they're saying that's what heaven will be like. Let me give you a glimpse using metaphors that you're used to. Yeah, anyway, that's what is sort of behind some of these images. The idea of an oasis where there's peace and tranquility and final rest.
Interesting. I haven't heard anything in Islam that meant similar ideas to what in Christianity you talk about molten fire. In other words, lava from a volcano. And maybe, as you said, it's context from what people experience.
That's right. I didn't give you, well, we only got a little sprinkling of some of the images, but that the night journey tradition had a lot of details. I can't remember all of them. So that's like a 300-page book. I summarized it in like 1/3 of a page. That's a very elaborate story. It's about as long as, you know, Dantes Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. It's the Islamic version of that, and there are a lot of details. So there may be lava in there for all I know. I don't remember all the images. But yeah, you're right. In general, they're speaking language. This is true of all the traditions. They have a cultural aspect. You know, Jesus talked about leavened bread and things like that. Buddha talked about rafts going over water. These are things that people understand in those contexts, right? So, okay, but also presumably God knew, and the divine knowledge came through Muhammad, that this religion is going to spread. So it better have some images that would appeal, from Spain all the way over to Southeast Asia. So there would be lots of different kind of images that would come through the Islamic revelation and the Hadith. That's like 6 volumes, 6 times the size of the Quran is the official Hadith or authenticated Hadith, and Kathy shared a little bit of that before. Okay, any other comments, questions, observations, complaints about these two religions?
It's kind of ignored now, isn't it?
What's ignored now?
The teachings are ignored by the followers.
You know, I have a theory about that. It's funny you say that. In many Protestant churches, for example, you won't hear much about heaven or hell, and you won't hear much about second coming of Christ. Certain topics sort of fall out, late in a religion's history, whereas they're more important elsewhere. So I think maybe a lot of people are skeptical today about the afterlife, but what we're doing is showing, there was guidance about it in the original scriptures of all these faiths. All right, I see a hand up. Belinda, please.
Okay, one of the things you talk about family resemblances. One of the things that seems to cross all the religious lines is the metaphorical imagery of whether you're talking about heaven or hell or something else. There's all this tremendous imagery that's based in the physical world, you know, streams of water, sulfuric eruptions, you know, and all this sort of thing. And that's because that's what we know. And that if we look at these things and try to find a literal or fixed meaning, we're going to miss the point. That if we understand these things as metaphors, I've gone around for years saying everything's metaphor. Even our lives are metaphor. And what does a metaphor mean? Well, I ran across a good example. A guy was sitting in on a sidewalk coffee cafe in Athens, and a metaphor drew up and started unloading coffee bags. A metaphor is a truck. A metaphor is something that carries something important.
And it
So in
speaks
this
to the
case,
people
the
that hear
metaphor
it.
was unloading coffee, which everybody wanted.
Yeah.
And the metaphor of, say, the heavenly street, a beautiful river that brings water and plants to everything. We all want that too.
Absolutely.
And the metaphor is unloading that meaning for us.
Yes.
And
You know, it did.
everything I said just now is also a metaphor, okay?
Absolutely. You know, some of the indigenous metaphors for the other world, like the happy hunting grounds,
Yeah.
or the other side camps. See, this is very related to their experience. So I agree with you. We need metaphors that are culturally familiar, and good teachers speak in the language of the students and try to lift them up. But you know, in my chart, my 4-level chart, I'm trying to show you, you have to think beyond the visible world, right? An afterlife world, or a spiritual realm, or a revelatory realm, a transforming realm, the ultimate realm. And even those have sometimes metaphoric imagery, but they tend to get a little more abstract as you move up. But, you know, a word like creator, for example, or the author of creation. This is a term used by Jews quite a bit, sometimes by Christians. The author of creation, the one who wrote the book on what reality is like. That's a metaphor. It's making God a writer who says be, and it is. That's a direct quote from the Quran and Baha'i writings.
Yeah.
He says be, and it is. But that's a metaphor for people who know what words do. All right, friends, we ran out of daylight. Any other questions, comments, polite complaints?
I'll just make a comment. So I think you all know that my husband's Ismaili Muslim and I'm Buddhist. And so we raise our kids as jointly Buddhist and Muslim. And the way we tackle the afterlife is, so I took the Bodhisattva vow. So I believe that all the good things I do, all the merit, will go for all beings. So in the end, like, all beings get to cross over. So this universal salvation at the same time to nirvana. But then my husband believes in paradise. So we told the kids that when you die, you get to pick. If you're a good person, the important thing is to be a good person. If you're a good person, you can go to paradise. But if you want to be reborn to keep helping people, you can be reborn. And so at different times, they tell me they're going to do different things. They're 5 and 8. So I just thought you might like that story.
That's fabulous. There's going to be more and more interfaith families in the future. This is a Herodian prophecy. Right now, that's very unique, your family, but there's going to be more and more of that. The world is getting to know itself. Transportation and communication are connecting us all. Okay, friends, next time, what are we doing? I think we're looking at Christian stuff. Oh, excuse me. No, Christian, Jewish, and Greek. Oh, my goodness. Wow. That's, I think, 8 pages worth. Yeah, we won't look at all of it, but we'll take a substantive survey of those. And again, there's family resemblances. Jews, Greeks, and Christians. I'm even going to try to look at Protestant and Catholic too. Hans Kung represents a Catholic perspective on the afterlife, and Born Bjorg, a Protestant view. Okay, friends, see you next week. Thank you so much, everyone.
This was wonderful. Thank you. Next month. See you
Next month.
Thank you
Oh,
so
next
much.
month, yes.
Yes,
Fun.
next year, actually.
That's true. Next
Next
year.
year. See you next year.
I just want to
Yeah.
recommend to everybody,
Have a
under,
good
under
week.
Islamic scriptures, look at number 5. It's very
Oh,
important.
number 5, she says.
Yeah, you didn't have anyone read it, I
That's
think. but it's
homework,
really-
number 5. Okay.
Number
It's
5,
very,
all
very
right.
significant.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Great. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye, thank you.